Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. It's 6 o'clock. First, I just want to thank everyone for coming and welcome you here today at the Met for this evening presentation entitled Colorful Korea Inside the Collector's Eye. My name is Eleanor Suahyun. I am I always forget my title's quite long, Korea Foundation and Samsung Foundation of Culture Curator for Korean art here at the Metropolitan Museum. And tonight we're celebrating this current exhibition called Colorful Korea, the Lea R. Sneider Collection. And so you can't go into the gallery right now because the museum is closed, but at some point after this event, if you're curious, this is the current collection, the current exhibition in the room, and it is featuring this wonderful gift that we received of about 60 objects, although there are more objects in the collection, in the exhibition room right now, by Lee's three children who happen to be here, well, two and then one who is in the screen with us, and he'll be speaking to us later. But Dina, Dan, and David Sneider were so kind to gift us part of Lee's Korean collection. And that's what we're going to be learning about tonight is her collecting and who she was. So I first met Lee in the early 2000s when I was just starting out my graduate work at Columbia, getting my master's in East Asian languages and cultures, as I was really starting my journey into studying Korean art history. And looking back now, I'm so glad that I met her at this early stage because when I went to her home, I saw just not only like the collection that she had, but she had a group of Korean objects that were not the ones that I saw in textbooks or in lectures or in museums. And at that time in the early 2000s, there weren't that many places to see Korean art in museums. Now it's quite different. And it was really great and eye-opening because it was an exposure to an area that was really lacking. And now with this wonderful gift, the Met is now able to show an area that was not really part of the canon. It wasn't the calligraphy, the Chosun porcelains, the ink painting. It was an area that was really lacking. So this is a really wonderful gift, and we're so grateful for that. But it also showed me what a collector and then a dealer also did when I encountered Lee. And a collector is somebody who is really has to have a very personal aesthetic sensibility, and that definitely is what Lee had. And so today, that's what we're going to learn about through two talks, one by Daniel Sneider and then followed by Adam Thorman. So I don't want to go any further. I just want to just delve right into, I guess we can show the second slide. I'm sorry. Moving forward, I guess I can move it forward. And this is just an exhibition display. And I just wanted to show you this because you'll see other photos in the two presentations that won't look like this, but you'll see where there's sort of these links. So now I'm going to move on and introduce Daniel Sneider, who will be our first talk today. He is a lecturer in East Asian Studies at Stanford University. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us in person today, so he is with us via technology, the wonders of technology. And so at least we still can have him present with us. And his research focuses on current U.S. foreign and national security policy in Asia and on foreign policy of Japan and Korea. He is the former Associate Director for Research at the Walter H. Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center at Stanford. That is also a mouthful. In 2010, he was named a National Asia Research Fellow by the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and the National Bureau of Asian Research. He has published extensively, so I'll just only mention a few. One is a 2016 co-authored book with Dr. Kyug Shin on wartime memory and elite opinion entitled Divergent Memories, Opinion Leaders, and the Asia-Pacific War. And he's contributed to the 2017 volume entitled North Korea, Peace, Nuclear War, ? Prior to Stanford, he was a longtime foreign correspondent, and his writings continue to appear in news publications such as The Washington Post, The New York Times, National Review, and The Financial Times, just to name a few. Today, he is here as Lee Sneider's son, and to provide invaluable insight into Lee's introduction to Korea and to Asia and what informed her collecting. In his presentation, Lee and Dick Sneider, Accidental Orientalists, So he'll give this talk. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. See if I can get this to work. Hopefully you can all see this. My apologies for appearing virtually, but I'm honored to be asked to speak here tonight at the Metropolitan Museum of Art about this incredible exhibit of our mother's collection of Korean art. When I visited the exhibit last spring, I felt like I had walked into our mother's living room. I had the pleasure of visiting the Lea Sneider Collection in its original form for many years, but it's a joy to see these works presented here to a wider audience. And together with my brother and sister who are with you tonight, I want to express my great thanks to the Met and to the curators, particularly led by Eleanor, who've done such a remarkable job of restoring and mounting this exhibition. I'd like to talk about the origins of our mother's collection. So, our parents were what I do call accidental Orientalists. They grew up in the Great Depression in this area, my father in Brooklyn and my mother in Jersey City. And I think I can say with confidence that Asia never entered their thoughts until, like most Americans, that fateful day came in December 1941. And the war made our father an Orientalist. The US Army, clearly without checking out my father's linguistic skills, sent him off to the University of Michigan to become a Japanese language intelligence officer. And it was there that he met my mother. And this is a photo of them getting married in the midst of war. Our father served in the Pacific Theater, including in the Battle of Okinawa. He spent his time interrogating Japanese prisoners and reading captured documents. And then he joined the occupation of Japan, where he was based into 1946. And after this journey from Brooklyn to Asia, our father was by no means a committed Orientalist. After the war, he went to the Harriman Institute at Columbia to study Russian, and he became a Soviet expert. But then he was recruited to the State Department's Office of Intelligence and Research to work on Japan. There were a lot of other accidental Orientalists gathered at the State Department Intelligence. All of them were men trained as Japanese language officers during the war, some who served in the occupations of both Japan and Korea, and who later joined the Foreign Service. And these men and their wives went on to spend almost all their careers dealing with Korea and Japan. And they were different from the Foreign Service officers of the pre-war period. They weren't, for the most part, graduates of New England prep schools and of Ivy League colleges. They came from all over the country, from Minnesota, Kentucky, you name it. And they were all soldiers, veterans of a war that they were determined not to repeat. Bill Bundy, who was a very famous advisor to both President John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, and was our father's close friend and mentor, wrote this about that group of people after our father's death. And I want to read you what he wrote. He said, Dick Sneider was one of a special group of Foreign Service officers, teethed in war, apprenticed in the intense first years of the Cold War, and then settling down to increasingly high-level responsibility. It was a group that combined the idealism and vision of the war and early post-war years with a realistic grasp of the changing position of the United States as it moved from the 1950s to the 1970s and 1980s. Nowhere was that change more striking than in America's relations with Japan and Korea, the centerpieces of his service. So, how did our parents first become involved with Korea? It's a somewhat strange, but I think interesting story. In 1949, when my father was at State Department Intelligence, he was assigned as just one of two people working on what was considered to be an obscure, newly formed communist state in North Korea. The North Korean desk of American intelligence literally occupied a former closet in the intelligence headquarters. My father complained bitterly to my mother about what he thought was a demotion and a dead end to his career. And then early on Sunday morning, June 25th, 1950, a call came to our home from the Secretary of State's office asking my father to immediately report to the State Department. And he was out on the golf course, naturally. And our mother, with her 1-year-old daughter in tow, finally tracked him down on the sixth hole. And for the next 2 days, our father never left work. And in the months that followed, he was thrust into the center of the first great crisis of the Cold War, namely the Korean War. Later that fall, shortly after MacArthur's brilliant landing at Incheon had turned the tide of the war, and the US and South Korean forces had marched north, our father was asked to become a member of a small team of intelligence officers sent into North Korea. Secretary of State Dean Acheson saw this as a golden opportunity to prepare the first case study of how the Soviet Union set up a satellite state. That team was out in the countryside, seemingly in territory that was not going to be given back, interviewing farmers when a jeep arrived from the Eighth Army headquarters to tell them that there was a massive Chinese counterattack, which had taken MacArthur by surprise. They escaped from Pyongyang literally a day ahead of the Chinese and down the peninsula back to Seoul. They did produce a landmark study of North Korea as a Soviet satellite state, which was classified for more than a decade. It's still a controversial document because some scholars consider it to be the origin of a distorted Cold War portrait of North Korea as a puppet of Moscow. But I think for our father and his colleagues, there never was any doubt about the necessity of the Cold War, and that was seared into them by the Korean War. About a year after the end of the Korean War, our family moved to Japan. And our father had become a foreign service officer by then. I was quite young, but I have very vivid memories of Tokyo in those days, beginning in 1954. It was still filled with American troops and bases. It still was just rebuilding from the wartime bombing. The photo that's in the bottom is a picture taken, I believe, from behind where we lived in Tokyo. The embassy was home to a whole group of these former language officers who were tasked with forging the post-war, post-occupation alliance with Japan and Korea. It was often a very stormy process, but they were quite relentless and unapologetic about the use of American power to maintain security in the Far East and contain the expansion of communism. And this is, of course, when my mother, depicted on the top, became herself a diplomat, and a diplomat's wife in the State Department in those days, maybe still now, although it's probably broadened for all partners, are considered to be in effect, officials of the U.S. government, and they were rated and judged by the State Department on how they performed their duties. As an alliance manager, our father and his colleagues, they understood that for Koreans and Japanese, these alliances were both a source of security, but also a constant and uncomfortable reminder of an inherently unequal relationship. So Washington did not always understand the desire of Koreans and Japanese to assert themselves, to be independent, while still being dependent on the United States for their security. And it was the job of those diplomats to convey that tension back to Washington. And I believe that our mother can claim some credit for helping our father develop that understanding. It was she who cultivated a real love for the culture and traditions of Korea and Japan. I think it's fair to say that our father's appreciation of any culture on his own may have stopped with the Brooklyn Dodgers and Sam Snead, for those of you who know golf. Our mother, who was transported from Jersey City to Tokyo, managed to, I think, quite quickly and elegantly combine the role of being a diplomat's wife, and raising a family. I'm giving you a couple of no doubt embarrassing shots here of my sister and my brother and myself in those Tokyo days. Her passions for art and music, which were part of her upbringing, were woven very quickly into her life in Asia. She made herself, I think, into a recognized expert and scholar on the aesthetic traditions of both Korea and Japan. And she was also a very serious concert pianist. And she brought her into contact with a very rich tradition of performance of Western classical music in both countries. And she formed very deep friendships with a number of musicians. But I believe her first love from the early days of our life in Japan was for the tradition of pottery. And that this art had come to Japan from Korea. Our mother was one of the early post-war supporters of the Minge or folk art movement in Japan, which from its beginnings in the 1920s was based on an appreciation of the Korean craft tradition. And this idea of art that grew out of the ordinary and utilitarian objects created by craftsmen for daily use was not widely popular at that time in either Japan or Korea. I think, as Eleanor sort of referenced, much more dominated in those days by the Chinese influenced traditions of court art. I was fortunate, both as a boy and a teenager and later as an adult, to accompany our mother quite often on trips to pottery kilns, to dusty antique stores, as well as art dealers and galleries. And as children, she dragged us along to her visits to great Japanese potters, including people like Hamada and Shimaoka, who are considered national treasures now in Japan. And as a correspondent later, when I was based in Tokyo and covering Korea and Japan, I accompanied her on visits to Seoul, and I loved watching our mother navigate the art world in Korea. She broadened out to explore contemporary ceramics, textiles, crafts. She had a really extensive network of friends and Korean art experts who she had developed relationships with back beginning when my father was in Korea as ambassador. And it was you could see that it was a shared passion for her with these Koreans who were very excited about someone who appreciated their own culture. And in that sense, I think our mother played a pretty significant role in creating awareness of this folk art tradition in the West. Um, After service in Pakistan and Washington, including a stint at the Nixon White House, our parents returned to Japan, where our mother developed her profession as an art collector, but she also was a diplomat again. Here, she's pictured here at a tea with the prime minister's wife. She had, my father was number two in the embassy, and she had a huge responsibility in some sense for managing a lot of the affairs of the embassy as well. So she was a busy person. In 1974, our father was appointed ambassador to Korea by President Ford, and they moved to Seoul. This is a picture at the top of the swearing in as ambassador in Washington. The children are looking on proudly. Our mother was brought with her to Korea a real appreciation to the art of the Yi Dynasty, when folk art, I think, was a major current. And along with that, she had, of course, the role of an ambassador's wife, which again is a very, very important position in a way. On the left is a meeting with the Prime Minister of Korea at the time. On the right, although my mother's not in the picture, she's nearby. This was the ceremony reception they were the first occupants of the U.S. ambassador's residence in Seoul, which maybe some of you have visited, a wonderful building. That's my father greeting the widow of Syngman Rhee. After they returned to the United States at the end of 1978, she began to build her career as an art dealer. In 1983, together with Robert Mose, the curator for Oriental art at the Brooklyn Museum, she put together the first important exhibition of Korean folk art titled Auspicious Spirits. And this current exhibition, I think, includes some of the items assembled for that show. I'm not going to read it to you, but the text there is of the New York Times, very nice review of the exhibit. But I do want to read to you the opening of her introduction for the book that was published, the catalog that was published in association with the show, because I think it really sums up her relationship to Korea and to the art and culture of Korea. She wrote, "It was indeed a most auspicious spirit that gave me and my family the opportunity to live for some years in Korea and to come to know, in a dynamic period of progress and change, the vitality and warmth of a proud people. With a long period of wars and occupations behind them, Koreans are once again free to revel in their own national identity and a strong sense of national pride. As has been true of nations throughout history, it is her rich cultural heritage that serves as a focus of national pride, and it is through a discovery and understanding of this heritage that others may come to know her better." And following that Auspicious Spirit exhibit, our mother really brought, I think, attention for Americans to the really rich explosion of modern Korean art, which we now see everywhere. But at the time, I think my mother was one of the few people trying to bring attention to this, including fabric artists, contemporary ceramicists, of which there are, I think, examples in this exhibit. And my father brought that same sensitivity to Korean national pride to his work as a diplomat. He bluntly warned Washington in a cable that he wrote in 1975 in the midst of many serious crises in US-Korean relations over human rights and other issues. And he said this to his colleagues back in Washington: "Our present policy toward Korea is ill-defined and based on an outdated view of Korea as a client state." And not long before he left Korea, he sent another cable talking about a delicate period in US-Korean relations, and he warned against American arrogance and hectoring. And he wrote, "Koreans are increasingly proud of what they are achieving economically and their ability to stand on their own 2 feet. This pride is bolstered by a perceived shift in international opinion toward a greater recognition of South Korea as a valuable partner, particularly in the third world. And Americans," he continued, "need to recognize that the alliance is, quote, evolving in the direction of a more equal relationship, and that sometimes American actions, in the eyes of many Koreans, have lacked full respect for Korean sovereignty." I think those words resonate very strongly today. Ultimately, whether it was in the realm of alliance management or cultural appreciation, I'd say that our parents grew from being accidental to being actual Orientalists. And as a journalist and now as an academic, I've worked and traveled to Korea quite frequently over the years, and I have never had a visit to Korea when I was not introduced at least once as the son of Lea or Dick Sneider. It's my proud legacy and a gift from my parents that never ends. Thank you very much.
Now I have the pleasure of introducing Adam Thorman, who is an artist, photographer, and educator based in Oakland, California. His first book, entitled Creatures Found, was published last year by the Educator Collection, and it illustrates Adam's practice, some of which he will share with us today. He received his BFA in photography from Tisch School of the Arts at New York University and his MFA from Arizona State University. He has exhibited widely, from the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, the Sam Lee Gallery in Los Angeles, to Koik Contemporary, I hope I said that right, or KOIK Contemporary in Mexico City. His work has been featured in publications such as the New York Times, the LA Times, and KQED Arts, and has been acquired by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. As Dan reflected primarily on Lee's pre-New York years, Adam will bring us to Lee's New York and being Lee Sneider's grandson. Please welcome Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you for everyone at the Met for making all this happen. I'm incredibly excited to be here, in part because the Met was a foundational place for my own practice. A professor, Philip Perkis, an undergrad, had me sit with the two Buddhas 2 rooms down from the career room that changed the way I see art. So being here is a thrill. This is my grandmother, Lee Sneider. I love the pairing of Dan's talk and my talk today because they're so different. Dan bring the history of the family, and mine, as I started going through it, became much more personal. I'm a landscape photographer by trade, but starting in 2015, I started to take photographs whenever I visited New York. I had a close relationship with my grandmother. As Eleanor said, I went to New York University. And when I was here, I would come up for all sorts of holiday things. I also would live with her when I was in between apartments. I worked with her on her gallery as well. And when I was preparing, I found the 2003 sofa catalog, which was kind of a wonderful example of chance that looking through, there are 3 names on here. The staff were Lee Sneider and Eleanor, and the photographs were taken by me. I was proud looking back at it because I was 21, I think, when I took these photographs. They're 4x5 slide film. And I remember Grammy and her husband, Rudd, took a cab down with all these precious artworks and brought them up into the Tisch photo studio, and I made these images for them. I also had a lot of pride looking back at this because looking at the list of artists, this is my grandmother, who was already, older at the time, and she was working with all of these young contemporary artists in Japan and Korea. And part of the show is these historical objects, but part of the show also is all these contemporary artists that she worked with and continued to bring in and look for in her life. So this is the first photograph I kind of had made in her apartment that was real, and it really represents who she was as a person. In thinking about this, I think about my relationship with Japanese and Korean art tends to be more minimalist. And Grammy certainly had that, but also there's this maximalist side of her. And this bathroom with 2 different bright, full floral patterns, and then what sort of art do you put on that? And it's another busy floral. I don't know how she'd feel about me putting kind of her bathroom stuff down there, so ignore that for her sake. But I just love this image of kind of these layers and layers of texture. And as a person, she was so bright and full of life. I was talking with Eleanor, and there was a story that Rudd told about kind of realizing he was like the old man married to a young girl, just with her energy. And she really stayed that way through her entire life. Again, to show her maximalism, this was the kitchen, and just these layers of textures that are so fascinating. A bunch of the pictures I'm going to be showing are from 2020. She passed away in January 2020, and right before COVID. And the family went out for the Shiva, and I took my camera around and made a whole bunch of images of the apartment. And so it's this unique moment of time when she essentially was still present when she was gone. And I hadn't looked back at these. So it was really emotional for me to go back through and look at the apartment. It's also a large part of my experience of New York, and look at them now, kind of 5 years later. This is another portrait of her. She loved the piano and played up until the end. And pairing this with this image, which was the piece of music that was up on the piano after she passed away, Younger Than Springtime. And one of the things in sharing these images that I want to highlight is the fact that kind of art and life were just part of the apartment. So kind of, you can see screens on the background. These were wood pieces that Rudd made. A piece by a Japanese artist that I always love, just kind of all in amongst the apartment, this idea of this minimalism and maximalism, this really simple art of this, simple fiber arts ball, kind of everything layered together and really lived with. For her, art was something to be enjoyed and appreciated. Another side of her, every summer she would go to Vermont with the family, and this is my mother, Dina, the eldest of the three, with Grammy, again from 2018. And just wanted to share, for me in this talk, it was important for me to really bring her to life, for people to see all of who she was. Next, if you ever went to her apartment, it is the most famous part of her apartment. It's the red dining room. It is the most intense, bright red. I'm a color photographer. I'm very good at balancing color. It's almost impossible to balance this thing because that red is so intense, it never feels right. But again, seeing just this mix of art, you'll see as we move through this fullness of color, this fullness of art on through. And I don't know anyone else who is brave enough to paint a room in their house this color, that room you actually go into all the time. Similarly, her bedroom, this gorgeous orange, again, incredibly emotional for me because you can see that this is a moment when Rudd is still in the bed and she isn't. So as a photographer, I always think about kind of the details of life that show up in images. And you'll notice if you've been in the gallery, that centerpiece image right above their bed is Walnuts by Po Kim, which I'm so glad other people can appreciate. It's an incredibly beautiful piece. So I'm an artist. I have a BFA and MFA in photography, and I'm still practicing artist. And I don't always realize where influence comes from. So in doing this talk, I was thinking about how kind of who she is and the art that I saw growing up with her fed into who I am. And seeing this piece and thinking about it again, realizing kind of how much it wasn't in the forefront of my mind of how much it has influenced what I make. So this is a piece from 2025 from Lassen National Park that I just made this year. And it was interesting looking back and seeing this reference of kind of these simple forms against a whitish background, these soft shadows. And another piece from 2022. This is a series where I'm altering prints. So I digitally went through and took out everything that wasn't rock and shadow. And then I made a print of it on a matte paper and went through and with white Conte crayon, whited out the shadows. So it's a piece titled Unshadowed. And again, it was moving to look at these pieces that are two pieces that are part of my current practice and look back at the relationship between Po Kim's Walnuts, which I'd never thought about before going through this talk. Jumping back to her orange bedroom, I wanted in making these pictures to really just document the life left behind in a space. And again, this maximalist feel, just kind of stuff everywhere. And as Eleanor said, anyone who has spent time in the place, her family, even though we were far away, was always part of these images. And you couldn't not see us walking through the house. This image, in some ways, it's about getting older, of kind of these medicines and glasses sitting on the side table, but also I love the relationship of, she loved these wedding ducks that were all over. There were all these ducks throughout the apartment, and then finding a gourd that mimicked the duck that also is right next to the medicine, and kind of everything all together. It's this maximalist way of seeing. And at the same time, you'll see in some others with wider shots, there's her apartment was also a gallery, so she'd bring people by to see and collect art. And it walked this line between minimalism and maximalism. It gave space for pieces while at the same time kind of having the art just be part of the apartment. This is Rudd, her second husband. And you can see this is the same spot I had made that portrait of Grammy 5 years before. But I wanted to highlight the wall back here. This was her special personal collection. And there were some things in there that were incredibly old and special and some things she just loved. These things were not for sale. And it was a joy looking back through and seeing how many of the pieces here are currently up in the museum. The cup with a handle, this incredibly gorgeous small gourd pot with this beautiful texture. You can see it up close in the exhibition. This piece is there. So you can see that for her, it was just like, this was the living room where you'd sit and hang out. I've napped on the couch in there. She would sit in that first image, she was doing the crossword, I think at that point, kind of doing the crossword, and sitting by the window, just surrounded by the art. Her first or second book, I don't remember which one was first, was Kanban, a book of Japanese shop signs. And you can see those kind of throughout as well. I didn't have a full shot of it, but her office, which again, another bright color, this bright yellow. And I love just these details of what was in there. You can see the kind of the history of everything she worked on, of these little cheat sheets around. So the Japan's historical eras by time. And all of the time zones. I didn't include them because I didn't want to put people's phone numbers up publicly, but one of the things I loved is on this wall was every member of the family with every place they'd lived over the last 40 years, kind of cross out the next one written over. So this office that was just so full of stuff and all the people, and it was just a kind of a repository of memory. The last one here, I can't read it, but I thought you might appreciate also important moments of life, both for her and for my grandfather, Dick, were up there. And so this bit of newspaper article from Korea Daily from 2018, so from 2008. At the same time that she had all this amazing art up, she also would include my pieces. So this was kind of in the hall leading out from the main entryway. And it's funny for me looking back that my grandmother loved me and would include my art. And it's sometimes a little embarrassing that this is a piece from 2002 when I was 21 and an undergrad that I've forgotten about, and I'm glad I forgot about. And this is a piece from grad school that I'm still very proud about and have shown. And so, but just kind of the love of my grandmother of including me as her grandson who's an artist as part of her kind of, she'd bring people by and like, oh, I showed people, someone liked your piece. I was like, oh, thank you so much. And it was really wonderful. I talked about the bit of influence of things like Pokin's walnuts, but I've always felt a really strong kinship with Japanese photography and want to share a few of the photographers that I'm really influenced by. Kikuji Kawada's Chizu, the map, which was images of Hiroshima and kind of the effects of, after effects of the bomb. Formatting's wrong. Daida Moriyama's Stray Dog. And I'm a photography teacher. I teach high school. I've ditched my students who have a sub right now. But I show and talk about this sort of work a lot. And what I've always loved about this era is it was a group of photographers who developed a way of a photographic language for speaking to the kind of angst and loss of growing up in Japan post-war. Having lost the war, the cancer and scarring of the people walking by you on the streets and your family members, occupied American soldiers in the streets, and that these photographers developed a visual language to speak to that feeling of alienation. Masahisa Fukase's Ravens. And for me, the first image that marks this series was actually right as the bomb dropped. Less than 20 minutes after the explosion, Toshio Fukada, who was 16, made this image of the mushroom cloud. He did end up living a long life. He lived until 2016, I believe. But this image where you can see the scratched up negative, I always imagined it's because of being exposed to the, being so close to the explosion. But these images are some of my favorites. They really inspired me. Also, I talked about this minimalism, the sense of spareness of having a single subject matter you can focus on. And I've taken this visual language now to talk about the landscape in the time of climate change. So for me, it's not about making those same images again, but learning how you can take this high contrast and this visual vocabulary of alienation and apply it to the landscape. So this is an image from my series Voids, which is about kind of an absence as a presence, a void as a subject you can photograph, and finding voids in the landscape, which reference this feeling of loss and poison in the landscape now. So this is an ongoing series, and it was nice going through and thinking about this, of finding this influence from Japan so clearly laid out. It's a mixture of straight images and altered images, finding ways of, again, highlighting that absence in the landscape. Eleanor talked about my book that came out in the fall, came out in November. And I want to share some images of this, and in part because it ties back in with this talk. So this is a cover. It's called Creatures Found. It's a book of pareidolia, when you see faces in the inanimate, like looking at a light socket and seeing a smiley face. And I have that sort of brain. It's a metaphorical brain. It looks at things and sees what else it can be. And here's some of the images from it. Finding a face in a shadow. This is from Joshua Tree in 2020. One of the first images from the book when I was in grad school in Arizona, finding this elephant or mammoth in the bushes outside my professor's house. And I share this instead, it ties back in because the last image in the book is this one. And as I said, most of those pictures I was showing from 2020 from her apartment were from her Shiva, but the whole family flew up to Vermont for her burial. And at her burial, I brought my camera and I was making images. And as I approached the grave, I saw this face looking out at me. And it felt like a gift. This image that I wasn't expecting to make and wasn't expecting to find. I'm haunted by it in the best way possible. In a way, I kind of hit it at the end of the book. I don't talk about it a lot, but felt like an important way of ending the book and kind of sharing how she's fed into my work. This is her and I in the front, kind of the living room, an image from when I broke my arm right before in high school and was in Vermont and us dancing. I'll close with the last picture I made of her in 2019. Thank you.
Now we're just going to have a little time of discussion between Adam, myself, and Dan. We're going to sit over there. Dan is going to be on the screen with us, but I'll be sort of with us. And we'll just keep up the photo of Lee, Adam's last photo of her from 2019. And we'll just have a little discussion. First of all, I want to just thank Dan and Adam for just really two very interesting talks that I'm like, again, I'm glad that we paired because you hit two different, both time periods of Lee's life and then in terms of where we are right now. So thank you for that. I also want to thank Adam for all of the images of her home that you shared with us in your talk in particular, because that was the Lee Sneider that I knew and I first encountered in 2000 was in her apartment because she didn't really have a brick and mortar shop. You know, she showed her works and as being a dealer in the apartment. And I have told this story many times, but I was one of the people that was shocked when I saw that red dining room. I could not believe a room like that could exist and someone would paint it that way. And it was amazing to me. And for anyone who goes to the exhibition, there is an overall pink
theme to the exhibition. There's pink in the partition wall, and there's pink all throughout. And that's really an homage to that red room. When we were thinking about what color to sort of use in the colorful Korea, we were thinking about different kinds of yellows and things, but I shared an image of that dining room with the design team, and I said, well, we know we can't make it that, because then no one will see anything else but that red color, but maybe something that kind of hints to that. So it's a little Easter egg, but now that I can share with all of you here. So that's really great. I said I took notes, but then of course I didn't take notes because I was listening carefully. I guess the first kind of softball question I want to put out to both of you is, and it's softball, but actually might be hard to answer, because I know it's always hard for me to answer this. What is your favorite Korean work of Lee's that you just saw throughout? And it could be here at the Met, but it also could not be here at the Met. But I just wanted to ask you both what kind of work has always sort of stuck out to you and that you've always really liked of hers.
I can answer that very quickly. I have two favorites. They're very different. One was the scholar screen, which you have, which sat in the corner of the living room, the 2-panel scholar screen. Maybe I falsely identified it as a would-be scholar, but I saw such a perfect expression to me of that school of Korean art. But I also love the wood carvings of the 7 sisters, which sat on the tansu, a Korean tansu, I believe, in the living room behind the couch. And my mom had she had many different kinds of eyes. She had an eye for, I think, in some ways the more traditional, but she also had an eye for the completely unconventional. I think both of those kind of express that. And, of course, color was always, she wasn't into subtlety. That's my answer.
Mine, I always love ceramics, and there's a bunch of those pieces, but it's hard at this point not to say Po Kim's walnuts. It's a piece that I always liked on the wall, and then as I dug more into it in doing research for this, my version of research, really, that's going to be my favorite moving forward.
Very nice that you chose pieces that are currently on exhibition in the gallery. So if anyone hasn't gone to the exhibition, now they'll have to go back and search for both the Po Kim and the 2-panel screen. And actually, the 2-panel screen is being shown in at the back of this portrait. So it sat in that corner. And yes, the 7 ladies. I also often call them the 7 sisters. That's not the official title. It's just they're in the gallery as well. So that's really great. The other thing I think you showed through, Adam, your talk particularly, was how she lived with these objects, and kind of a little another insider take about the exhibition is that obviously the exhibition gallery space is not a domestic sphere. It's a gallery has glass walls and all of these things, and there's inherent furniture, gallery furniture that's there. But I did want to bring in a little bit of that domestic feeling and how that she lived with these things. And these were objects, not only that Lee lived with, but most of the objects, particularly not the ceramics, but, the locks and the rulers and some of the textiles and the paintings, they were things that were lived with at the time in the 18th and 19th century. Some of them are very much everyday objects. So I wanted to make sure that there was that sort of feeling, and I was inspired by the way she showed things in her home. So for the furniture pieces, we wanted to make sure that we can have objects on them, around them. Some of these things are low to the ground because she often had some pieces, right on top of the carpet, sometimes on a little wooden basket kind of. So she wouldn't put it right on the ground, but a little bit elevated. But that's how she had them in her home. So I was trying to evoke some of that interior space in the gallery design. And sometimes it doesn't come across, but thankfully somebody here just complimented me on that and just reminded me that I was like, oh, the intention did come across. So I wanted to share that. And that was, again, another inspiration from just Lee and the way she lived with things. I guess another question I have for you, Adam, is that some of the objects that she had, like the Seven Sisters, the painted wooden dragon, we had in the first rotation up a dragon panel that was on. Those were used in funeral rituals. So I think for a lot of times, a lot of Koreans would not have wanted to collect them as art objects in their home because they have this ritual function. Now we have, big museums. They're often referred to as gokdu, and you have these museums that have them. But for a long time, they were not thought of as collectibles. Again, Lee was ahead of the curve in the sense that she knew them. But thinking about your own practice and sort of animism that is there, did you know that some of those objects were in this ritual context, or was it more, again, a subconscious sort of interaction?
I was just thinking about that is because the difference between being displayed in a museum gallery and in the house, that it wasn't always clear what was special and what wasn't. I think everyone in the family had their own relationship with pieces, that there were pieces that we loved and would connect to. And certainly, like my grandmother had, she'd tell you about whatever you were looking at. But it was a much more personal connection, at least for me, I think for most of the family, of like, oh, this thing is special and I have a connection with this. And that's just, there's things in the gallery that I didn't realize were as special as they are. Because they were, oh, that's the thing that's kind of in the corner. And so it was kind of more by chance, which I also like a lot. And seeing how the objects change from house to gallery has been really amazing. It's part of why I wanted to bring in those pictures for other people to experience that.
Thank you. I just remember that when you mentioned Po Kim, I remember a story that David told me that he was with Lee when she purchased that piece from the artist, Po Kim, who lived in New York and was married to Sylvie Wald, and there's a space that's their foundation runs downtown. So I just remembered that story, and now that being one of your favorite pieces, that's pretty cool. It's a nice little full circle moment. Again, I should have written these down because now I forgot the question I was going to ask Dan. About what was it? I don't remember, but Dan, I guess I can ask you, because I think whenever I hear about people who are ambassadors or ambassadors' wives, or they've gone to different countries as like a specific role, as whether it's with the government or with and it's often for a shorter period of time. I always felt that with Lee was a little bit different because she went back to Korea and her ideas of Korea wasn't frozen from like 1974 to 78. And could you speak to, because of she was always going back to Korea and Japan, basically yearly, or sometimes I think even twice a year. Do you think that helped her just obviously see the growth of the country? Because the Korea that she knew and the Japan that she knew, and you saw it in those photos in the 60s and 70s, is very different from the Korea that she encountered in the 90s and the 2000s. And if you could sort of speak to sort of her going back and experiencing Korea and Japan in a different way.
Well, Japan and Korea have been, they're a part of our lives, and they remain a part of our lives. So, extending into the next generation. Actually, our oldest son is the bureau chief for The Economist magazine, covering Japan and Korea. He's going back and forth to Japan and Korea all the time. He, by the way, also is always finding encounters with our parents when he's in Korea. He's often introduced as Dick Snyder's grandson, which he seems to like. But I think it's just, that's the way they related to those places. They weren't just assignments. And I think I tried to sort of give you the somewhat probably too long of the history of the family, just to get a sense of, from, a very important moment in everybody's life, World War II and the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. These places were part of our family's life. I mean, it's where the three of us grew up, and we remain very connected. And I think my mom always treated it that way. I mean, I think she always looked forward to these they weren't just buying trips. I mean, she went twice a year. She just loved going. And I think David also, we accompanied her many times, sometimes as a good translator in the case of my brother, or a bad translator in my case. But, they were really just a very, just part of a broader engagement. Our mother, for one thing, she had a really, before anyone started talking about Korean cuisine, I know we have a big Korean cuisine boom. Our mother she was her own Korean cuisine boom. And I remember going with her to vegetarian restaurants in Insadong. She liked to eat vegetables, and it was always an interesting experience. She was a full bore engagement for her. So I think that, and she really liked to see the evolution of Korean art. I mean, and you know this, Eleanor, quite well, her tastes really evolved, and the range of artists and of objects and kinds of things that she was engaged with changed over the years. So she wasn't stuck in a particular place. I think, and there were many things that I couldn't quite understand why she liked them, but she did. I do want to say one thing, which is that talking about the house, the apartment as a gallery, is that I think for all of us, one of our biggest problems is that my mother would sell things we really loved, and we would get angry at her. Why did you sell that? And she would say, well, it's a business. That's what we do. So.
Do you remember a piece that she sold that you were like, oh, I wish she hadn't?
There are more than one.
Well, we're at the 7:00 time, but I wanted to give Adam a chance if there were any last words that you want to say, since Dan was able to say something.
No, just thank you so much for making this happen. It was really wonderful for me, hearing stories from Dan that I didn't know about, and just to bring this up to celebrate a really wonderful person.
Thank you. Thank you for the thanks. Thank you for all being here. I loved seeing all the photos and to see just Lee come to life once again, and then to have her in the gallery. So please, everybody, come back and see the show. It's up until February. And there are 2 gallery talks, actually. I'm sorry. On Thursday, I'm giving an in-gallery talk at 3 p.m. And then there's another one in January. So if anybody wants to hear me talk, which you don't, please come. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.